Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting CEN seminar. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Desiré Carioti, a research fellow from the University of Milano-Bicocca. Desiré received her PhD from University of Urbino in Italy. Her research focused on the development of language-independent tasks to identify developmental dyslexia in both monolingual and minority language children. After serving as a lab manager for a prestigious European Research Council project on language development, she is now involved in a project exploring the correlates of reading difficulties. Her research focuses on determining whether language-independent tasks in reading-free screening can predict reading skills and identify neural connectivity markers in 7-year-old children. Today, she's going to be talking to us about the role of rhythm in the reading-free screening tool for dyslexia in monolingual and minority language speakers. Now I will hand it over to you, Desiré.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm very happy and proud to be here and to share with you my main research topic and interest, I have to say. Today, I will present you my read-free screening tool, but before, let me say who I am. As you said, I work in Italy at the University of Milano-Bicocca, and I earned my PhD in the center of Italy. And at the moment, I'm working on an exciting project in which we are trying to find neurocognitive and cognitive developmental markers of dyslexia in children with familiarity for the risk of dyslexia. And we will use both neuroimaging and the task I'm going to present to you today, so the read-free screening tool. My main research interest, as you have said, are developmental dyslexia, rhyme, language, and reading, and bilingualism. And today my aim is to say to you how all these things goes together in a consistent point of view, which start with music and comes to reading and to dyslexia. I'm pretty sure that you don't need the definition of developmental dyslexia, but here today I would like to summarize some aspects of this definition that are very relevant in my opinion. For example, as the DSM state, problems of dyslexia are related to accurate and fluent written word recognition, poor decoding, and poor spelling abilities. I would like to stop a moment on the definition of accurate or fluent written word recognition, because this is something which is depending on the orthography we are consider and on orthographic depth. As we have published two meta-analyses, one in neuroimaging and one about behavioral cognitive markers of developmental dyslexia, we have observed in both these meta-analyses that there are differences in dyslexic, but also in typical children and adults of shallow and deep orthographies, because as you may know, the correspondence between the grapheme and the phoneme, so the fact that, for example, in Italy, we have one grapheme for each sound of the word house, while in English the correspondence is completely different, because usually the grapheme do not correspond with the phoneme in always in the same ways, but it's depending on which phoneme is accounting to another. We can have very high differences in the behavior of our dyslexic both children and adults. So also the strategies for reading can be different. So the differences can be found also in typical readers, because in a certain sense, if you think at the English, for example, a word analysis and so a lexical identification can be a strategy more suitable for reading the word, while if you think at the shallow orthographies as Italian, also the the one-by-one grapheme to phoneme conversion can be a satisfactory way to decode the word. In any case, of course, we know that adults have a preference for the lexical identification, but also the strategy of reading acquisition can be different in these two different kind of orthographies. And this is what we observed in our meta-analysis. Here, I just summarized some aspects that are relevant for me, both as a clinician and as a researcher. Doing a meta-analysis on studies that group shallow and deep orthographies, and both in adults and children with and without developmental dyslexia, was useful to find common aspect and differences. The common aspect can be interpreted as behavioral universal markers of developmental dyslexia. And as you can see here, what we found is the word reading fluency deficit, not accuracy deficit, and the phonological awareness deficit, rapid automatized naming deficit, and short-term working memory deficit. For what concerns, for example, reading accuracy, we observed here that in deep orthographies, both in typical and dyslexic children, the acquisition of accuracy is slower than those we observed in children of shallow orthographies. Then, of course, in adulthood, the things changed and the deficit remained more associated to developmental dyslexia. But in any case, as you can see here, the diamond is very small. So the difference between typical and developmental dyslexia is lower than in this case. In this case, we have typical children of shallow orthographies that have a good accuracy at starting and then improve. And here we have typical children that have not a very good accuracy at starting, also probably because of the things that I said at starting, so the strategy of reading that are different and also the acquisition, but then becomes very, very accurate. So this is something that I'm depicting to you, even though it's not related to rhyme and music, because I want to say that when we are looking at data, we have to look carefully to who we are investigate. So if we are talking about children or adults, or if we are including in our sample people that comes from shallow or deep orthographies. And this is also the way in which we have to carefully revise the literature, because so many things were published in English, but as I am an Italian researcher, I have to carefully evaluate what can be suitable for Italians. Anyway, causes of dyslexia are so many. The things that I want to summarize to you is just that we can have theories that are descriptive theories that talks about the deficit you can observe in dyslexia. So, for example, the phonological theory, the allophonic theory, and the double deficit hypothesis. Then we have theories that speaks more about the neurobiological dysfunction that can be related to dyslexia. And in this sense, the magnocellular and the cerebellar theory are the two main theories. And then we have some theories that speaks about very, very specific cognitive dysfunction that are related to dyslexia. And as you can see here, the accounts for dyslexia are so much. And this is translated in the fact that in research were put forward a lot of paradigms to test developmental dyslexia. And so we have a lot of specific aspects in which we believe that dyslexia can have a deficit. This is interesting because it makes very hard to define dyslexia, even though we are studying dyslexia from 50 years and more. Anyway, the interesting stuff is that in all these cognitive specific theory, and also in the cerebellar theory, as well in the phonological and allophonic theory, there are some specific ideas about the elaboration of auditory stimuli and about the elaboration of accent, rhythm, and music aspects. So here is interesting because, you know, even though we are talking about language, of course, also music, it's an auditory stimulus that can be elaborated in the same areas and in the same places, even though we know from literature that music and language can be considered two separate modules. But anyway, they have some very common aspects and some very high connections. So it's interesting the fact that all the theories that speak about the auditory processing, and so things that can be concerning both the elaboration of language but also of music aspect, are related to a specific profile of dyslexia, deep dyslexia, which is mainly based on a deficit in the sublexical root and in the aspect related to phonological processing, while other theories that do not concern auditory elaboration are more related to visual attentional aspects and define another profile that is more accounted on the lexical root of reading and can be defined as surface dyslexia. We wanted to evaluate whether by looking at just musical aspect, we are looking on just one side of dyslexia, or whether there are some common aspects that are catched by rhythmical music stimuli. The things that is interesting is that, for example, in the rapid auditory theory, which is one of the theory put forward for explaining dyslexia, Stallal and Gab explain how a music training can improve language and literacy skills. And here I wanted to highlight to you the direction in which they state this relation is present. So we have to look at musical training as an improvement in spectrotemporal processing that then has a cascade effect on linguistic component, example for the syllables on phoneme, and these of course have an effect on improving language skills and thus a less effect in improving literacy skills because they are very connected to language skills. This is very interesting and open field, an entire field in literature. So now at the moment, there are a lot of different papers that talks about the relation of music training, and rhythm and dyslexia. What we can say here is that probably the relation between music and reading is more better defined by the relation between music and phonological awareness that have a cascade effect on reading. But even though we are saying music, the right definition, in our opinion, is rhythm that has an effect on phonological awareness and then a cascade effect on reading. For understanding whether our intuition was right, we decided to explore better the relation between rhythm, this specific aspect of music processing, the rhythm that means both matter and rhythm, but then we will look at this in 2 or 3 minutes, and the relationship with the several aspects of language, because we wanted to understand whether there is just a relation between rhythm and phonological awareness, or other aspects of language processing are related to rhythm. Here we have to consider that different aspects of language processing are very correlating each other, of course. Anyway, exploring just the number of records we could find in literature, we have so many information about how this topic is at the moment investigated. We used on PubMed these 3 keywords: Rhythmic language, Rhythmic specific learning impairment, or developmental language disorder, specific language and developmental language disorder, sorry. And we found 14 correlational studies, just 3 comparative studies that include data, enough data to be inserted in a meta-analysis, and 2 pre-post studies. This means that we couldn't have enough papers to do a meta-analytic study on the comparison between a specific language impairment and typical children, but we could run just one meta-analysis about correlational studies. So looking at these 14 studies, we found just one study that was addressed to adults. So our meta-analysis speaks about the relation between language and rhyme in children. We found 10 papers that investigate the relation between rhyme and phonological awareness. So we have to, and you see 10 papers are more than all the others. So we wanted to, I want to ask to you, in your opinion, it is possible that the relationship between rhyme and phonological awareness is well known because it's the most investigated at the moment? We don't know whether further studies on other aspects can reveal that rhyme has a strength correlation with other aspects, more maybe with other aspects of linguistic processing. In any way, we found also 6 papers that stated the relation between rhyme and morphosyntactic processing, rhyme and rapid automatized naming, working memory. Few studies, 5 papers between rhyme and verbal working memory. We couldn't run a meta-analysis on these studies because we included just aspects of language for which we had at least 6 records, so more than 5. And then we have just 1 paper that look at the correlation between rhyme and vocabulary, and 1 paper that look at the correlation between rhyme and spontaneous speech. So linguistic aspects, we know from the starting, are still poorly investigated in relation to rhyme at the moment. And those are all the aspects that can deserve more attention from research. So take notes. The tasks that are included in each area are different. As you can see here, we have several tasks for the phonological processing, several tasks for the morphosyntactic processing that could be also very different between each other. Rapid automatized naming adds some tasks that were more consistent to each other because the difference was just in the kind of stimuli that were used, but anyway, the process is the same, while we cannot say that the process of morphosyntactic comprehension is the same of sentence repetition. And this will be a critical aspect of our meta-analysis. As you may imagine, we run 3 different meta-analyses for assessing these 3 different processes and their correlation with rhyme. For doing this, as we found several tasks in each paper and we had repeated measure, we use a function of the metaphor package in RStudio that allows to do multi-level mixed meta-analysis, and we included 2 levels as a random effect. So the papers, in terms of all the tasks included in the paper, taking into account that variance is related to the same samples, the level of the tasks, so the level in which each task was inserting into our model, also another source of variety. And then we include some fixed moderators, some fixed effect. You have to think at this meta-analysis as a multi-level mixed model, as a mixed GLM. So we included some moderators as fixed effect because we wanted to take in consideration some sort of a source of heterogeneity. For example, think about the fact that we include the rhythmical task, but not always the correlation with this rhythmical task was based on the same rhythm task. So rhythm task could be classified as motor task and non-motor task. Motor tasks, as you can imagine, means that the child has to click or in any case play a rhythm. Non-motor tasks were more often based in rhythm discrimination. This inserts a very important source of variancy because motor tasks were more often motor tasks. So the children have to synchronize to a regular beat. And this is not musically defined as a rhythm, but this matter is a different aspect of the concept of rhythm, because matter, as you know, as you may know, I don't know how you are confident in musical levels, but matter is the discrimination of the sequence of time of a specific target of space, of musical space that is defined in time because of the matter, while rhythm is more accurately defined as a cluster of notes that can be of different durations that can be inserted in a matter. So when we did rhyme discrimination, we were discriminating between the duration of the different notes, while when we are considering the motor task, when we are considering motor tasks, we are considering just a bit, which is repeating itself, okay? We decided also to insert some, and please, if you have a question, you can interrupt me and ask, of course. In the case of the meta-analysis concerning phonological and morphosyntactic processing, we decided to add two moderators related to the type of language included in the different studies. So we classified for the phonological awareness meta-analysis the isochronies of the language included as so we had languages classified as phrase-timed or syllable-timed. And in the case of morphosyntactic awareness, we classified the richness in the morphosyntactic structure variety of each language. Then we use the procedure Treatment field to assess the risk of bias. And we can go directly to see what we found. For phonological awareness, we found a good correlation. As you can see here, the Pearson error is of 0.3, and anyway, a significant correlation between rhythm and phonological processing. There is a tendency to significant or moderators, so we look at this lightly significant effect of the isochrony. Anyway, is not a strong effect, as you can see here. And there was no moderation of rhythmical task. This means that there is a correlation between rhythm and phonological processing, both if we talk about rhythm itself or we talk about matter. When we consider morphosyntactic processing, something happens that put in my mind so many doubts, because as you can see here, we have a correlation, a significant correlation, lower than in the case of phonological processing, and the R is of 0.2 and not 0.3, so not a very strong correlation. Also, the other one is not a very strong correlation, but here I don't know whether we can define this a correlation, but by the way, the fact is that we observe that these three records belonging from the same paper have effect size either than 0.5. So these three records seems to be like outliers, and we ask ourselves what would happen if we take out these three records. Also because we check in the paper, and of course we respect so much Gordon that do always beautiful works, but we did not find that they use, for example, tasks that were very different compared to the others. So we really do not understand, maybe it's a question of sample numerosity, but anyway, by taking out these three records, we found that the correlation becomes slightly significant. And anyway, the shape of this effect size change a lot. So morphosyntactic processing has a relation with rhyme. Is still an open question in our opinion. And anyway, we have to take into account that also in the morphosyntactic processing, sometimes there is also a place for phonological processing, because usually also some phonological articulation is inserted in the morphosyntactic processing if the task is a producing task. When look at Reitman run, something very curious happened, because we have a statistical significant p-value, but anyway, the R is 0.1. So this is not a correlation in our opinion. And by the way, we have to say that rapid automatized naming is not a pure linguistic task, because there are some very relevant aspects related to integration, automation, and so executive functions. Anyway, for run, we had some studies and enough studies to be included in a meta-analysis. So we anyway run this comparison, but we do not believe that there is a correlation between write and run. The discussion of our results is easy. Phonological processing showed a correlation, something that was already suggested by the literature about the relation between write and reading. And the link between write and phonological processing is partly affected by the isochrony of the language. So the differences between the language involved is always to take into account. What we can say about the relation between write and morphosyntactic skills is that we need further studies. And anyway, further studies are needed in general, because as you can see, we have a few number of studies that deeply investigate the correlation between write and verbal skills. But what we can take at home with us here after looking at our meta-analysis, that there is a relevant correlation between write and phonological processing, and this can suggest that a deficit in phonological processing could mean a deficit in rhyme and meta skills, or at least this is our hypothesis. And if it's so, this would be so interesting, because, you know, timing skills conceived as both rhyme and meta could be viewed as non-verbal language independent marker of developmental dyslexia. Why nonverbal language independent markers are needed here in Italy? Because of the growing attention on children that are bilinguals. Due to the last 20 years immigration flow, children that have a bilingual experience are increased in the school, and usually they show some struggles in reading, but it's very hard to say whether the struggles are due to a developmental dyslexia or are due to their language experience and their less exposure to the Italian, so I mean the language of education. Usually usually bilinguals is conceived as a very relevant cognitive protector, something that increases the cognitive reserve and that can also increase executive functions. We are not against this view, of course. Bilingualism is a very good chance to increase and preserve the cognitive power of our mind. But anyway, we know that effect on bilingualism on language can also, in a window of time of the development, be also negative, for example, on lexical rehearsal and vocabulary size. Less is known about the relation between bilingualism and reading skills, but what we know from the studies of Coverman is that age of exposure usually has a role. So the question is, so often children are diagnosed with dyslexia also when they are bilinguals, but we want to understand what good practice we can apply in the clinical environment for assessing bilinguals. And another things that I want to state is that we are not talking about the general concept of bilingualism. We are talking of a specific bilingualism because our children are minority language children. We prefer to define them as minority language children because their conditions are very inconsistent each other. We take this definition from August and Shannon that speaks about the fact that minority language children are individuals from homes where a language other than a societal language is actively used. The fact that this language is actively used at home do not mean that they are dominant in that language. Our children are first and second generation immigrants that can be exposed to a minority language in the family context, but are educated in Italian at school, and they have a very heterogeneous degree of cumulative exposure because it's depending on family and on how much the source culture is intrusive in the everyday life of the family and how much the parents of these children are able to speak the minority language, but also the minority one. You know, sometimes these children are only exposed to Italian or maybe are exposed to the minority language due to a grandmother or grandfather that sometimes says some words to them. In any case, this can affect anyway phonological processing because, you know, maybe they are able to produce some sounds that are not typical of the majority language. Anyway, by looking at the behavior of these children in reading, we observe that their pattern of reading skills are different of those than those of typical monolinguals. You see here the minority language children are in the middle, but their patterns is also different from those of dyslexic monolinguals. And this is even more true if we look at pseudo-word reading fluency, which is the main marker of developmental dyslexia in shallow orthographies. And as you can see here, these children are exactly performing like monolinguals. So the thing is, can we say that even if there is a significant difference in the performance with typical monolinguals, these children have developmental dyslexia? Maybe some one of them, yes, and maybe someone other not. We know from a very recent work we published that cumulative exposure, language exposure, and quality of the language input has a relevant and significant role in affecting language and reading skills. And this is something that should be taken into account in the clinical evaluation. I say these things because usually here in Italy, tests that are used for the clinical evaluation are still standardized only on monolinguals. So if we used monolingual standardization without taking into account these intervenient variables, we are doing a diagnosis that maybe is not right. Maybe yes, but maybe is not right. And so we are trying to transmit the best practices for clinical assessment here in our country and in all other countries of Europe. But here in Italy, the issue is very relevant because we have a lot of immigrants. The issue is the one that I've already explained, and it's easy to understand that we have the very same symptom, so struggling in reading. Our DAP is developmental dyslexia, but for monolinguals, we have the chance to know some aspect of the language and reading acquisition that were deficitarian. For example, difficulties in acquiring and automating processing, phonological deficit, in several cases, previous struggles in language. While for minority language children, we have a peculiar language acquisition. That means usually the acquisition of 2 languages and difficulties in assessing, so in the same view, struggles in language and a peculiar experience in general. So this is a linguistic bias, and it's a very relevant issue if you think that developmental dyslexia is a linguistic disorder. How we can solve it? By looking at nonverbal cognitive markers of developmental dyslexia. And now I'm coming back to music and to rhythm because I want to show you this work. The first name is someone that you may know, Johanna Ta, that published this work in which are included some tasks that are also included in the Red-Free screening tool. And both monolinguals and bilinguals, poor and good readers, were compared in several tasks, and bit synchronization was the main marker of poor reading skills in both mono and bilinguals. We have, of course, included bit synchronization in our Red-Free screening tool. Our tool was based on the idea to develop an entire battery of tasks that were nonverbal and that minimized the more that was possible the use of language. I say this because there is a task in which the language is used, the rapid automatized naming, but we found a way to minimize the language use in our battery. And our battery was aimed at finding markers of dyslexia in both mono and bilingual children. I'm presenting this work that was published in 2023 and is based on my PhD project and my PhD thesis. But at the moment, the Red-Free is still running and has a completely new design. And I will show something about it in a few slides. This was the first design of the Red-Free screening tool based on the literature and based on all the theories that were put forward in literature for explaining dyslexia. We found a lot of different nonverbal tasks and paradigms that were conceived in literature capable of discriminating between dyslexic children and typical children. Some of these tasks are a traditional task of the experimental psychology. For example, the cocktail party or the go-no-go tasks. I'm pretty sure that you know good of these two tasks, and also other aspects. Other aspects are perceptive aspect, very fine-grained perspective aspect as the tone discrimination and the grayscale, so I mean the brightness discrimination. As you may have observed, these tasks were divided in a section of auditory tasks and a section of visual tasks. We wanted to assess both the profile that may characterize the dyslexia, so the deep dyslexia and the surface one, but we wanted also to understand what task, as you can see here, each task was built in both the modality. What task is effective in discriminating between developmental dyslexic children and typical, and whether this was effective only in one or in both the modality. Only the cocktail party did not have a counterpart in the visual aspect, because the cocktail party is mainly an attentional focusing task based on auditory processing. So we couldn't obtain the same, but we make a selective attention aspect. We put a selective attention aspect also in the run shapes, because we did 3 different matrices, and one of these as a masking, another one as a crowding effect due to the high number of shapes inserted in the same perimeter. To look at the new fashion of the red free, now the red free is similar to this task that I'm presenting to you. As you can see, the child can choose planets. Is a space travel game, and children can choose a planet and do a mission for each planet. Here I summarize some tasks. The run shapes task. Here we have the task in which we cannot avoid to use language. But anyway, we have to name a few shapes, and we choose shapes as a stimulus because usually letters and digits are very automated in primary school children, but we didn't know whether these were automated in a different way in monolinguals and bilinguals. And so we use shapes that maybe are less automated in both the populations. Then we have the go-no-go task. Children are asked to click when they see the yellow planet and to not click when they see the red one. We add 2 different go-no-go, one regular, in which stimuli are delivered in a regular interval. Sorry, sometimes the Italian comes out. So the go-no-go regular, which means that stimuli has a very regular, easy, and the irregular one in which the stimulus interval is random. Then we have the cocktail party. Of course, this is just what they see, because the cocktail party is only performed by headphones. So they see this fixed screen, and then they have to listen to a target stimulus and to recognize this target stimulus in the crowded noise of other stimuli. And then we have the main task, the most important for this seminar, because we are focused on rhythm. So bit synchronization task has 3 different moments. The one in which children with the red light, it's just to listen to the beat. The second moment, which is the entrainment, the red is yellow, and they have to beat at the same speed of the metronome. And then the last part, the free tapping, in which they had to keep maintaining the beat while they do not listen anything in the headphones. I would try to let you listen at this task. I don't know whether you can listen.
Oh, no,
I don't think it's working. I can't hear it. Can you hear it, Mahi?
no, I can't. No.
Okay, no, yes, it's impossible when I share the screen, but anyway, you see the light is becoming yellow, and maybe you've seen some difference in the brightness is because the child is clicking. Okay, and now the child is still clicking, even if is not listening anything. The fact of changing the button color is the way in which we find a way to let them know when they have to do the different part of the task. And as you can see here, the task is very simple and it's quite easy to understand for a child of different ages. The bit synchronization task was performed at two different speeds, 80 and 100 BPM. We have one faster, the 100 BPM, and another a little bit slow, but it's not so slow. And this is because we found in literature that faster rhymes are hardest for dyslexic children. Coming to our experimental study, we included 105 monolinguals classified based on standard deviation in reading task as good readers, and 37 poor readers classified using the same reading task. We did not use reading task for classifying minority language children as good or poor readers because we do not believe that we can rely on reading task standardized on monolinguals. And so our aim was to classify our minority language children using the red free screening tool, and then compare this classification to the one that we would obtain by using reading task, reading standardized clinical task. Our study was based on 3 steps. The first one was to assess the power, the discriminant power of each task in discerning between dyslexic and not dyslexic children. Then we passed to look at what task can be classified as belonging to a specific cognitive area. To the same, we did a principal component analysis by including both clinical tasks and our red-free screening tool tasks, because we wanted to understand how they grouped together and what latent construct they were measuring. And then we applied a multivariate approach because we wanted to take in consideration all the tasks we found discriminant in the univariate analysis, or the task of the red free screening tool, and to obtain an automated classification of children as poor and good readers. The classification was applied on minority language children, but the CART model was trained based on monolinguals. Why we did this choice? Because for monolinguals, we are sure about who is poor readers and who is not. Here, I just show an example of a univariate approach. We did logistic regressions and we run ROC curves. Here we have the data of run shapes. Anyway, by applying this approach to all our tasks, we had to exclude several tasks. And we obtained to save just 6 tasks. And as you can see here, visual reaction times are effective in discriminating dyslexic and controls only in the visual modality, while for, of course, entrainment and free tapping, so I mean bit synchronization tasks, are more effective when they are auditorily provided, but this is quite logical in my opinion. Then we have a good discriminant powers also for selective auditory attention, and the go-no-go was effective in both the modalities. So it means that executive functions are very relevant for developmental dyslexia, despite the modality in which they are tested. The principal component analysis reveals something very interesting, in our opinion, for several aspects of literature research on developmental dyslexia. For example, some of you may know that rapid automatized naming is often tested and sometimes is open the debate about the fact that is related on phonology or on lexical retrieval. More recent literature speaks about the fact that RUN is a proof of automation. And here we found that RUN is grouped with reading fluency. So in our opinion, this means that RUN as the fluency in readings means the automation of a complex process. On the other hand, we have the parameters related to accuracy that goes on another latent factor that is grouped with visual reaction times. So we think that here you have the aspect of visual analysis that makes children to be accurate in reading. And then we have a third latent factor that groups together our bit synchronization tasks and no-word repetition that we have tested to assess aspect of phonological rehearsal. And the last but not least factor was related to both attention and executive functions. Both in the visual and in the auditory modality. This is very interesting, but the most interesting stuff for me is to show you the decision tree that we obtained by training our machine learning approach. The decision tree is a very lovely approach because let you know how what kind of tasks are the more relevant for the classification. And as you can see here, the auditory gonna go 2 because it's the regular form of the auditory gonna go, is the best in classifying developmental dyslexic people and typical readers. But then you have to analyze or the bit synchronization aspect related to the part of entrainment or the rapid automatized naming. This is interesting because these 2 routes are very similar to the 2 routes found in the double deficit hypothesis, in which we have on a side the phonology and on the other side the rapid automatized naming. So once again, what we can see is that the place of phonology is here taken by rhyme. So it suggests that there is something in common between these 2 processes. Anyway, by going very quick on bilinguals, when we compared the assessment with clinical tests to the classification made with our CAT model, we found some some weird results. Because we found that, for example, we have 11 false negatives by looking at clinical tests. So what we can hypothesize is that the adoption of Italian normative data based on monolinguals may penalize minority language children. And we are pretty sure about it because we have studied the effect of bilingualism on reading skills. But on the other side, we have also 5 false positives. So I means that the 2 identified some minority language children as poor readers, even though they did not show any issues in reading tests. This is something strange. We can say that is something related to the inefficacy of our screening. And of course, this is a possibility, and that's why we are incrementing the sample numerosity. On the other side, we can also put the idea that maybe the tool is able to identify future emerging of deficit, but this is quite something that I don't think it's possible, but we are anyway doing an experimental study to see whether our screening is predicting deficit. I think that is not possible in this case because we add children from 7 to 13, so quite old to predict something. But then we can also think that maybe our tool is not able to classify just reading disorders, but also in general learning disorders, because the cognitive correlate of language of learning and reading disorders, of course, are the same. So the tool is effective, but what here is important is to say that the bit synchronization, as the other some other tasks that we have found, represent a very good language independent marker for assessing developmental dyslexia, and this means that it's very suitable to minority language children, so should be included in the clinical assessment and should be in general something to which we have to pay attention, because can be a revealing factor for observing whether a minority language children may have also dyslexia, or whether these children need to be supported in, for example, lexical variety, in increasing morphosyntactic abilities in the majority language. The future direction are still open, but we are working on several aspects of this checklist. What I can see here for concluding my talk is that language independent markers are very promising, and so I encourage other researchers to put attention on this. The nature of the right meta relationship with some aspect of language processing deserve more attention and are to better investigate. Here we have a very promising open field. But anyway, based on our study, the mainly aspect that is related to phonological, to rhythm, is phonological awareness. And in our view, phonological awareness is the core aspect in which rhythm meet language. Other questions that can be open are whether, for example, the deficit in timing skills shown by developmental dyslexic children concerns also anticipation timing. This is why, because based on, for example, my professor Natale Stucchi, we have to rely on rhythm, and in particular on matter, to define the space of timing, and we can make some anticipation inferences based on the matter and the ability to conceive the matter itself. And maybe so if we are not able to anticipate, we have different difficulties in integrating aspects in a mechanism like reading. Then another question relevant is what we can say about adulthood, because the skills we have observed are mainly observed on children. Records that we have included in the meta-analysis are based on children. And anyway, some studies based on cerebellar theories, for example, suggested that in adulthood, some deficits were lower expressed. So we would like to understand whether the right remains a marker also in adulthood, and we are still doing this. We have another research, and I can see here, and I can say to you very in advance that yes, probably the right is a good markers also in adulthood. I have to show here all the people I have the pleasure to work with at the University of Milano-Bicocca. And I have also to thank Johanna Ta, that was my colleague here in Bicocca too. And here you can find our two most recent papers. And I have to say thank you to you. I'm open to your question.
Thank you very much, Desiree, for the really interesting talk and amazing insights as well. I would personally like to start with a question, and then until we get some questions in the chat as well. I wonder how we can incorporate these results or principles of rhythm and music into educational strategies for students with dyslexia, for instance. Like from your experience, do you have something to say about that?
Yes. I have to say that this was the last and big aim because, you know, rhythm and in general music are skills that are very funny to perform. A musical training is a support strategy, more effective because it's much funnier and because do not rely on the deficit. So the first aim of my work when I decided to do a PhD was to find a way in which we can support children without frustrating them by asking them to read the things that they do not like to do, of course, and for a very clear reason, in my opinion.
Thank you. I think we have a question from Astrid.
Hi, Desiree. Thank you so much. That was such an interesting talk. I'm sorry I can't put my camera on at the minute, but I've so many thoughts, but I'll try to put it down to one question. I think it is such an interesting approach, you know, looking at these relevant cognitive abilities, and obviously it's a nice inclusive method for the bilingual learners. But I can see that some people would say, well, you know, if you're trying to identify reading difficulties without using a reading task, then obviously there is sort of convergent validity there, but not necessarily the construct, you know, of reading itself, you know. So I guess I just wanted to ask, you know, do you kind of envision this as like a standalone screening tool or as kind of like a complement to existing tools that use reading tasks?
In my opinion, this must taken as a screening and in the school environment. So it's just to give some information to the teacher on whether I have to signal or not this child for a clinical assessment. This was another aim of our study because, you know, here in Italy, we have a lot of waiting for be assessed in the national public health system, and you need a certification of the national public health system. But if there are a lot of children waiting that do not have a typical cognitive profile of developmental dyslexia, of course, the time is very long, but is unuseful in our opinion. So the question is, in minority language children, is hardest to determine whether this child can be dyslexic or not. We give you just some information to understand whether maybe you have just to support their exposition and their language skills during the school. And then if these difficulties do not disappear, of course, you have to do a clinical evaluation, but the clinical evaluation is mandatory. This is a first level screening.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I would like to ask one other question, that's okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the nonverbal cognitive skills, was one of them specifically had a significant effect on reading?
Yes, I have to say, the approach was not to look directly at the effect between a task on reading skills, the approach was to look at the classification, because as we used the reading skills for classifying children, we do not run correlations or regressions, for example, between the task and the reading task. The reading task were used just to classify the monolinguals, and then we look at comparisons. But anyway, I agree with you, or you put a light on me, because, you know, yes, it would also interesting to understand how those things goes together. But what I can say to you is my sensation is that I would find those kind of regression significant effect for run on fluency, and maybe for other aspect on accuracy. Here I have to take time to just 1 minute to say something that I think is relevant for you, because you are in London. I would like to be there with you, but I think that from the clinical point of view, you take into account more accuracy in reading, and you use some clinical task that maybe count how many accurate words you read in a time limit. Here in Italy, we use the two separate parameters. This is something relevant to say, because, you know, as we use the two separate parameters, sometimes we found very different results in the regressions with different cognitive tasks between the parameter of fluency and the parameter of accuracy. Not so different from those you can find, because number of accurate words in a time limit is anyway a proof of fluency, and so of automation. But when you look at the kind of mistakes committed in accuracy, you see that monolinguals and bilinguals do very different stuff. And so this is why we think, okay, maybe minority language children are not dyslexic at all, because they do accuracy mistakes, and accuracy mistakes are not typical of a shallow orthography like Italian, because if you just do the grapheme phoneme mapping, you maybe are so slow in reading, but at the end you can read easily the word, easily in terms of accuracy, not of fluency, of course.
Thank you very much, Desiré. I think we have a question from Antonio.
Hi, thank you very much for the amazing presentation. It was a super new approach for me, so thank you very much. So I have a lot of ideas, a lot of questions, but I don't know if I can ask a specific question, but I'm going to try. The first one is that if you have any idea of this particular information about reading and everything across different languages, because you are Italian, I'm from Spain, so for us, I think that the reading is super important, but I'm not sure in other more opaque languages, the role of reading is as much as important as for us. So I don't know if you have any idea across languages.
This is the issue for what we need to do more research in all over the world. I mean, I don't have to do further studies. We have to do further studies, because what I think is that also from very beautiful studies of Patel, and Niruddha Patel, who always assess the link between rhyme and language. The thing is that each language has a rhyme, has a prosody, has accent, and so they usually are different. But anyway, this accent and rhythmical patterns are present in all the languages. So in this sense, I think that there is a universal link between rhyme and language. But languages are different, and yes, I agree with you, but I think that also rhymes are different, because you know, metrical and rhythmic patterns that I've shown to you are only those of Occidental culture. But for example, if you go in India or in other places, you find different durations and different segregations of time. And probably this is more suitable and aligned to the segregation and timing of their languages. So I think that in the sense, the two things correlate, and probably we can anyway find a cascade effect on reading anyway. So at the end, I think that we will observe the same stuff.
Yeah. Okay, and my last question is also, I was working more in the intervention part in children with dyslexia. So I agree with you that we found different in reading between children with dyslexia. We have a task that is reading repetition. So we give to the children some reading and they have to repeat. At the beginning, children with dyslexia did worse than children without dyslexia, but then we do two type of intervention, more reading stuff, traditional about reading, phonology and everything. And other group was only in reading repetition. And we don't find transfer to reading skills in my study, and was a not super big study, not super well controlled. But I seen different project of other people that is not transferred to an intervention. So I don't know if you have an idea of this role between evaluation and intervention. I don't know. Just wondering about this.
And I have to say in confidence that that's why I do assessment. No, because yes, I agree with you, and I love to speak with people that make the rehabilitation part, because yes, my sensation is that I don't know whether this rhythmic improvement is directly transferring to the reading skills. I think that is depending on the type of task, but also what I observed is that the deficits shown by dyslexic are very different in relation to their musical expertise. For example, on the study that I'm doing on adults, I found that beat synchronization is still a marker, but I've also assessed dyslexic children dyslexic adults, sorry, and typical that do the University of Music. And they, of course, are different because they do not have a writing deficit, but they have still a language deficit and a deficit in reading. So what I can say is that the more the rhyme task is complex, the more it will train executive functions, in my opinion. And this is something very relevant if you take children that has younger children as possible, because you know the plasticity of the brain is anyway open but for a window of time. And I think that the intervention that is effective for young children. So that's why we have to start at preschool. But on the other side, I think that then we can train the rhyme because it's quite easy than the reading, because I think that reading is just the transposition of language difficulties in the grapheme to phoneme aspect. So probably the reading is more easy to solve. But keeping going on, and let's try to understand whether this is right.
I completely agree. Thank you very much. And I have the last clarification question, because I don't know if I am misunderstanding your final table, but you see that maybe your approach is not completely correct to do heritage language, because you see a lot of false positive or something like that. But my question is why? Because you remove all the linguistic part in your evaluation, so not completely, right?
No. Yes, I've removed basically all the linguistic parts, with the exception of the rapid automatized naming. But the thing is not. No, I don't. I really believe my screening is suitable for MLC. What I think is that probably the comparison, when you want to account for overall accuracy, sensitivity, and so on, you have to compare to a gold standard. And the thing is that our gold standard was the worst gold standard ever, because it's not based on minority language children. And so it's not even a real good gold standard. On a side, the false negative seems to show that, yes, this gold standard is very bad.
Okay.
And on the other side, we found some children that did not have reading deficit, because even though the task was not a gold standard, they behave as monolinguals. But for our screening, they were poor readers anyway. Because I think that the thing is that they are not poor readers. Probably they are poor learners. Maybe they have math deficit or orthographic deficit that we did not assess. And this is a limit of our work. So in further studies, we will assess all learning abilities, because yes, it's quite impossible to obtain someone which is only dyslexic. And on the other side, when we are talking on cognitive aspect, we use cognition and executive functions both in math and reading, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Questions? I think we've run a bit over.
Mrs. Foley was touched.
Oh, good.
Yeah. People have, like we were talking about, different reactions to different stuff. So I didn't.
Sorry, I'm not sure if Kay has a question. Yeah, if you do, please unmute yourself. If there are no more questions, I think we can end today's session. Thank you very much, Desiree, for coming.
Yeah.
Interesting talk.
Thank you so much to you. You know, I was so worried about speaking English so many times, but it's ended. And thank you so much. And sorry for the delay. I was testing a child, but he fell sick in the middle of the testing, and it was quite a desperation. But I'm very happy, and I hope to meet you all at UCL in person one day.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much. See you next seminar.
Hi, can I ask, is the recording going to be sent?